Today we are recording our special Halloween edition of the Three Sigler podcast.
Ooh.
Yeah, there's the ghost sounds.
Lightning.
And the question for today is, how do you parent through Halloween? Isn't that?
Well, kind of.
And that's why we've brought in three expert parents.
So here's how this started. Last year at church, we started talking a little bit about just how to approach Halloween as Christians, and if there's ways that we as church leaders can help people understand a healthy approach to Halloween. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's a lot of debate in that area. So then this year, me and our children's minister at Harvest Church put together a little pamphlet called Parenting Through Halloween as an attempt to give some guidance to parents as to how they can lead their children through Halloween. So today we're going to be talking about Halloween and a Christian perspective of Halloween. And we'll use this Parenting Through Halloween pamphlet, as kind of a guide to help us talk about it. But I want us to just kind of talk about the whole concept in general, so not just focusing on the parenting side.
Sounds good.
So to start with, when somebody asks you, what's your opinion on Halloween? How do you guys respond to that?
Yeah, if I was just asked flat out like that with no context or anything, I think I would say it should just be a fun little time, but there's definitely potential for people to take it into wrong ways and use it as sort of a carte blanche to just celebrate darkness.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I have a pretty good initial perception of Halloween. I think because of the way that we were raised, that it was just a more fun thing, and it was a time where you got candy.
And could go out and see your neighbors who you pretty much aren't going to see any other time.
Yeah, very unique, just something very different. Mm-hmm. But certainly as I get older, I can see more of the potential for unhealthy things potentially. And I guess just also as I've had more conversations with other Christians, from other traditions and people that I met in college whose parents were very against it and who were very adamant about avoiding it altogether, it's made me think more. And then you see creepy stuff, from time to time around the season, whether it's over-the-top haunted houses or commercials or just stuff that seems like it gets away from the silly side and starts getting more into the intense kind of gross or evil side.
That's good. So yeah, you brushed on a little bit about our upbringing with Halloween. What memories do you guys have as far as growing up and our participation in Halloween?
When I was really little, I was a kitty cat.
Yeah, I remember that.
Don't you think everyone remembers their first Halloween costume? Maybe not. No. I guess nowadays people dress up their babies.
Malachi, we dressed up when he was 2 weeks old.
What was he?
He was Peter Pan.
Oh, nice. I think the only reason I remember that cat is because we have a picture of it.
Yeah.
And I think Daniel was a clown.
I think Joel would have been a clown.
That was me.
I thought that was always...
Oh,
I don't remember ever being a clown.
Always? Was I multiple years a clown?
Yes. No. Multiple years was the Painters.
Yeah, we didn't have the most inspired costumes until we got to the Mafia.
Yeah.
I thought the Painters was a cute idea. Okay. I seem to remember when I was young, initially it was only do the Halloween thing at church, and not go trick-or-treating. And I don't know if that was just an age thing or if it was they weren't sure if they wanted to support that kind of stuff or what the deal was. But I definitely remember the first year they let me go was because this older neighbor kid who would always come over to our house and an adult who was a family friend and also that guy's friend. They were going to be going together around our neighborhood and said I could go with them, and mom and dad were okay with it. And I remember I was Batman that year and wore my Batman costume for the previous couple days as well.
Prepping.
With its Velcro on cape.
Yes.
Well, that's interesting because I didn't know there was ever a time that they didn't let any of us go trick-or-treating. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things where as the youngest child, you don't... the barrier is broken and you just never realize it.
Yeah, my memory is that it was like kind of a, are we going to do this or not do this? I don't know. And they were like deciding, but it could have just been an age thing. I'd have to ask the parents about that and see. I would guess, just knowing like our parents' backgrounds, that Dad probably grew up doing the normal thing and Mom grew up like never doing Halloween.
Yeah. I remember trick-or-treating basically from when we moved to Dothan, mostly as dressing up and walking from our house to Grandma's house, which she lived in the same neighborhood as us, stopping there for a while, and then continuing on to the Flemings.
Yeah.
And so these are all families that live in our neighborhood. My grandma lived in our neighborhood and some church friends. And so we were able to kind of like make our way down. And definitely when we were young, there was a lot of kids in the neighborhood. So there was just like kids everywhere. And so that was really neat to just have lots of people out and about in the neighborhood and all that kind of stuff. Then we did some like fall festivals, trunk or treats at church growing up. And so I remember participating in those. And
but those would never be on Halloween, right? It was like adjacent to date so that you could do both.
That sounds right.
Because originally churches started doing it, I believe, as like a real alternative to, I guess just being able to have a more like positive, family-friendly Christian version of Halloween. They would do it on the night, I think.
Yeah.
And then eventually they started shifting so that people didn't have to make this choice of like, are you going to trick or treat or are you going to do your church's thing?
Yeah, that way if people didn't want to do Halloween night, they could still do the church thing. But if people wanted to do both, they could do both.
Get a lot of candy.
Lots of candy. Yeah.
The one that I remember going to at church in Kentucky was, I remember almost nothing except that one of their games was they had this huge box that I guess was like, cardboard box that maybe they had taped some together, but it was bigger than a refrigerator box, I'm pretty sure. And it was filled with like crumpled up newspapers. And it was like the whale. And you had one of the youth or somebody would hide this little Jonah figure in there. And you have to like go in there and find him and dig through that. I thought that was pretty fun.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And then we all remember the skit at the Fleming's house Halloween.
Yeah.
Where
overall for me, that was the most memorable Halloween.
Probably for me too. We, as several...
You better set the stage.
Yeah, several youth and church kids put together this skit on the front porch of some friends in our neighborhood, the Flemings that I mentioned earlier. And so basically all Halloween, we were running this skit that ran, probably like a 5-minute skit or something like that?
Sounds right.
And so we would run it and then give out candy and then...
Like their front porch was like the stage, basically.
Yeah.
So people who normally would come to trick or treat, I guess the adults would kind of tell them what was going on. Okay, just wait like 1 minute and they'll start the show. And so then we do our little skit for them and give out some kind of candy bags that probably had like a church invitation or something.
Yeah. And so we would run it every 10 minutes or less. Like we ran it a lot throughout that night.
It was to a song, so it couldn't have been too long of a skit.
Yeah, that was really fun. I don't remember there being much anguish about missing out on the regular trick-or-treating. I think we had fun doing that.
It was super fun.
That was my favorite one, yeah. And Joel and I were the demons.
Yeah, we got to be demons on Halloween, which is one of my points in my parenting is avoid demonic stuff. But that's a little different. Okay,
it's for a good cause. Yeah.
It is different. Yeah.
Think about Mr. Carnal being Satan himself.
That's right. Yeah. And then it was me and Joel, and then Jonathan Fleming, who lived there, and then Summer Wells, another friend, were the 4 little demons. We were the youngest ones. I don't know if. I guess they decided
I think the idea was that they wanted the little kids to be the demons so they can just be like little and impish. And also, you guys get to hide in a bush a lot, so there's not a lot of pressure to like be, in position on stage.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't a lot of pressure on our role.
Yeah, the angels had to do more like choreographed moves.
Somewhat, yeah.
Daniel was an angel.
Anyway, but the skit was like a battle between Jesus and Satan eventually where... Jesus gets knocked out or killed or whatever and then comes back and defeats Satan. So any other memories that come to mind?
I definitely do remember the year. I guess, like, I don't know if it was like I was just going along to watch and I was too old for it, or if I was still kind of, I don't know. But the year when I kind of realized that, like, hey, these people live close to me and they seem friendly and nice, but we never see them except for now. It's kind of nice that at least we can say hi once in a while.
Yeah.
I have another really good memory of one of the trunk or treats at Harvest, where we did the whole everybody bring your car and decorate your trunk thing. And we just put down the back seats in our van and filled the whole thing with blankets and stuffed animals. And it wasn't much of a theme, but we and friends hung out in the back of the car for a lot of that night.
It was the most comfortable trunk.
It was the most comfortable, yeah.
So you decorated it with yourselves.
That's right.
We basically just made it a place for us to hang out the whole night.
Yeah. We just went and got some candy to start with and then went to our trunks and just hung out with our friends. So being a parent now in Halloween, last year's the first time we actually like went out to do trick-or-treating.
Mm.
And how could you?
Yeah, no. There's this neighborhood in town that like everybody goes to. It's like ridiculous the amount of people. And so
yeah, I'm not in favor of that.
Yeah, I'm not either. I like the idea of like
I'm against
use your own neighborhood. Like that's one of the good things of Halloween is you get to go around your own neighborhood. But Olivia really likes the hustle and bustle of those kind of things.
The busy place.
Yeah. She really enjoys like go to the pumpkin patch, like go to like do the Christmas shopping like right around Christmas just to be around the whole crowd and stuff. Not do the Christmas shopping, but at least go out.
Mm-hmm.
And,
kind of like feeling the full force of the season, I guess.
That's right.
Yeah,
and
it's like the excitement of the season.
Right.
There's a communal aspect to that. I get that.
And so she really wanted to go, like, let's go to this neighborhood that everybody goes to and really just experience it. And it was cool, but it is like, it feels much more like commercialized. The fact that like all these people are just like in from random places and they don't actually live there. It's way less like homey.
Yeah, and it's all about like your return on investment.
Right. But I'm definitely more aware of like, and this year even more so because my oldest son is old enough to really like be impressed by things that are scary. And so this year I'll definitely be more concerned about what he's seeing and what we're going near. I was last year still, but he was a little bit too young to really be afraid of it, I think.
Was there more of that kind of stuff in that neighborhood since it's like the Halloween neighborhood?
There's definitely some. I mean, you get a smattering of some houses that are like barely decorated, some houses that are decorated a ton and are fine, and then some that are like, you know, like graveyards with like zombies and stuff.
I guess you get that anywhere. And I will say in terms of like, you know, as much as I prefer for Halloween to be kind of like a, you know, meet your neighbors opportunity, depending on where you live, maybe your neighborhood isn't really going to be a good experience for you.
Yeah, well, and my wife Olivia grew up out in the country, so it was like you'd walk miles and get to like a few houses, you know, if you were to do your own neighborhood. So they always had to come into town. I guess you'd have to like, your parents would have to drive you from house to house in that case. Right. So they would always have to come into town for Halloween.
I will say too, to clarify, when we're talking about Halloween memories, from as young as I can remember, it was very clear to me, and I suppose this was just established by mom and dad, but it was very clear to me that being a superhero or a painter or something like that was cool, but a witch or a skeleton, like that was not cool. That was very clear to me from as young as I can remember.
Yeah.
So somehow they were able to very successfully establish that, even though we did trick or treat.
Yeah.
So they were very intentional about that to some degree.
Well, let's transition then to this Parenting Through Halloween pamphlet that we are giving out at church. And we'll just kind of go through that and use that to discuss different components of Halloween, okay?
Okay.
The first major heading is just Halloween is complicated, okay? And so what I have there isn't one right answer when it comes to how to handle Halloween. Some families are convicted not to participate at all, and some believe they can participate to a degree. These differing opinions are legitimate.
I guess we've made it clear kind of where, you know, we came from.
Yeah, that's probably important to just note for everybody that obviously our perception is probably going to be colored by the way that we were raised in it. If we weren't all brothers and like one of us had been raised in a family that didn't participate in Halloween at all,
Yeah.
like we might
This
have
would be a better podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do remember I guess just one or two times when the Hagneys were still across the street and we tried to do Halloween, and we like knocked on their door just thinking like, oh, they're our friends, of course. But their family was very against it. So like their lights were all off and like they were in there, but all their like not just their porch lights were off, all the lights in there. maybe not in the bedrooms or something.
We do not exist.
I knew they were there because, we were played with them all the time and stuff. But that was one of those, like, maybe we should read the signs and realize that like they don't want people to come over. But to us, it's just like, these are our friends. Of course, they'll give us candy, So that was, I guess, my first memory of directly realizing that like close friends had a difference of opinion on that than we were.
Yeah, well, I remember really being struck by a conversation with an international student when I was at Asbury Seminary that was just like, couldn't believe that Christians participated in Halloween. And he was coming from Africa.
Oh.
And just like, I just couldn't believe that people, like Christians, were participating in this stuff. It's like they don't understand the spiritual implications behind it. This stuff is real. It's dangerous. Like we see it all the time where I'm from. And I was like, that's really compelling when you hear that argument from somebody from another culture. And it puts a caution on me. Like, I don't want to just be blinded by the culture I grew up in either.
Mm-hmm.
And then around that same period of time, I was doing an internship as a chaplain at a VA hospital. And one of the other chaplains was a Wiccan. And so I had a lot of conversations with her throughout that semester. But she was huge into Halloween and like took that time off and went to like big gatherings of Wiccans and all kind of stuff.
Oh.
It was like their main day of the year.
Ceremonies.
Yes. Yeah, religious ceremonies. So then
Did you ever ask her what they do?
I don't remember. I remember just a lot of like, she would talk about it in very positive terms, obviously. There's a lot of community and celebration and it's getting together, all that kind of stuff, is what she would talk about. But I remember that was also at that time when I was at Asbury Seminary. So I was really thinking about like, this stuff is something to consider.
It's complex.
What's interesting to me about that is, does Halloween have these connections with darkness because of stuff like that? Or is it more like those type of religions kind of jump onto it to co-opt the sort of like dark side because they sort of have a natural affiliation with that. And they're like, here's the holiday for us. Like, let's make the most out of this.
I think there's probably some of both.
Well, because the story goes that it originally was a Christian, totally a Christian thing, and All Saints Eve, and the point of dressing as devils and whatnot was to mock the fact that Satan has no more power over us and all of this. But I don't know how much of that is actually true either. That's just what I remember hearing.
Yeah, I don't actually know either, and I intentionally didn't do any history stuff in this pamphlet, just because I feel like that can really get you in the weeds, and it's kind of distracting.
That's true.
So my thought is more like, it doesn't necessarily matter. Like, there's definitely some value to origin of things and like meaning behind that kind of stuff. But it can also be a distraction from like, well, here's where we are. So what do we do?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I think in some ways that can be like the inverse of, people trying to justify like, oh yeah, no, everything, Halloween's just great. It's actually a Christian holiday, is like the inverse of people being like, Christmas was actually a pagan holiday. We shouldn't celebrate that. It's kind of the same.
That's
using
true.
History in a weird way to justify your position.
Yeah. Just 1 second.
Well, then off the record here, I got to remember to see if Mom and Dad will get Mentos or Nerds Ropes or something good to give out this year. Because they usually have just like two or three little kids. So I always wanted to like really make it worth their while. Yeah.
Make it count.
Here's a college scholarship, son. Just kidding.
I do want to, it's a little bit like that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow type of thing. Like, oh, they came all the way down this cul-de-sac. I should give them something nice.
Oh, yeah. Next point there is, don't condemn families who handle it differently than you do. That's
guilty.
A lot of that's coming. Yeah, a lot of that's coming from 1 Corinthians 8 about like the eating of meat and people having different opinions to how to handle that. And Paul's like, don't cause people to stumble. Like, if you believe you shouldn't do something and you do it, then that's sin. So I think that's really important, is just like the legitimate differences that families come to. Then the last couple points on this Halloween is complicated heading is God isn't threatened on Halloween night, so neither should we be. And then the last one is communicate these types of things with your kids as they are age appropriate. Don't let them be ignorant to the reality of the spiritual battle.
I think that last one is just so important with so many aspects of parenting.
Yeah, just parenting in general is being sure that they have an understanding of why the rules are what they are.
And that goes back to what I was saying about how our parents were very clear on what is good, what is bad, and how we need to view things that we're seeing. Mm-hmm. That was always very clearly talked about through the whole process.
Yeah, I think almost my opinion is utilize Halloween to teach your children if you can. You know, you can't just like avoid it. Even if you don't want to participate in Halloween, you're not going to be able to just like prevent your kids from seeing it and being aware of Halloween. So you need to use it as a teaching moment, teaching event. And then I also think the one, like, God isn't threatened on Halloween night, so we don't have to be afraid. Like, I think that's important because there's that balance of caution when it comes to spiritual darkness and the enemy, but at the same time, like, not being afraid or, like, feeling like I've got to just lock myself up in my house on Halloween and turn off all my lights, right?
Well, I guess that's what my friends did.
I mean, hopefully they weren't, like, doing that out of, like, fear.
Lock the evil out on the street.
Right.
Yeah, I think that gets back to 1 Corinthians 8, like you were talking about. I mean, Paul is clearly not super concerned about this meat that's been sacrificed to idols, and he's not afraid of it, even though he says that he'll avoid it. He'll never eat meat again if it causes someone else to stumble, but he's clearly not fearful.
Yeah. Okay, so then we go into what can be redeemed. Okay, what can be redeemed from Halloween? So if your family decides to participate in Halloween, here's some ideas about components of the holiday that may be able to be redeemed. So my thought process behind this is just the redemptive nature of Christianity. And so when I really started talking about Halloween last year, there's that question of, okay, when do we just throw things out and say this is not redeemable? And when do we say, here's something that is redeemable and we can bring the good out of it? And I think that if we can do that, we want to. If we can redeem things that the world uses or values, like we want to bring that redemptive element out, but we can't obviously compromise in order to like say we're doing that, you know, and just in reality, we're just participating in the worldly things, but we're saying like, oh, we're redeeming it or whatever.
Yeah, you're justifying it.
Right. So that being said, like what elements from Halloween would you guys say can be redeemed?
Well, the one we touched on a lot is the opportunity to connect with your neighbors.
Yeah.
I think is one of the most valuable aspects.
An increasingly a rare aspect.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's one of the ones I have is just fellowship with neighbors and friends. And so I said, take the opportunity to meet and talk to your neighbors, brainstorm with your kids about how to invite others to church or share about Jesus. Giving away candy or other things is a great way to connect with people. So really trying to take it to the next level of like be strategic about the way that you are making those connections.
I mean, to me, that's definitely the biggest one, but I'm just trying to guess some other sort of like redeemable aspects of it, I guess. You know, having like a festive, you know, day out of the ordinary for kids, I think is a nice change of pace for them.
Yeah,
you know,
that's
they get
really
to go
good.
out in the dark, which usually doesn't happen probably, and you know, like at sundown or after sundown, they get to go around and walk outside. And that's probably, like, for many kids, that's probably not something that happens a lot.
Yeah, I didn't really talk much about that, but I think that's really good, is just the whole concept of holidays and the significance of doing things that are different than just the normal routine. I think that's a good point.
And that you have to wait, like, a whole year to do again. I don't know. I think there's some value in that, too. Just
like that discipline of having to, like, wait to do things? Or what do you mean? Or just the buildup of, like, it being so long?
Yeah, that's a really vague statement, I realize. But I guess it seems to me that, like, increasingly kids are able to sort of have what they want on a more instantaneous basis and not have to wait as much. And I'm sure there's exceptions to that. But I think anything that emphasizes to a kid that there's things that I can't just make happen because I ask for it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So many other things, going to whatever the activity they like, going to the movies, going to roller skate or whatever they like doing, getting new toys and things. And everybody's different, but I think compared to the past, there are more kids who are able to get that closer to on demand, maybe not.
No, I think you're
quite
right.
like that, but
yeah, definitely. I mean, we have to be really conscious of that because you can get on Facebook and buy like 50 toys for like $10 from somebody down the road, and it's like, oh, these are like 50 50 toys that like my kid loves. Do I do that because it's like such a good deal, or do you just not, in order not to like spoil them with just getting a million toys all the time? The cost is almost like a non-factor.
I think the pro move there is you buy it and then like store them up secretly and dole them out, you know, for special occasions.
A whole bag right here.
Oh, really?
A whole bag of toys right there that I'm giving out. Like we pulled out like 5 little cars for his birthday.
Oh, okay. So you're doing you're already a pro.
That's right.
But then it takes like eventually, the longer you're like storing things up, the more potential there is to add to the storehouse, you know, and eventually it just gets ridiculous. Where it's
That's
like,
right.
when are we ever going to give them all these things unless we just unleash the flood?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had to say,
there has to be some self-restraint to be like, okay, even if we don't need to look for more good deals.
Right. Yeah, I told Olivia already. I was like, all right, we already have enough stuff for Christmas. Like, we have plenty for Christmas.
That's a good feeling.
Wow, you guys are ahead of the game.
Well, she does that kids market thing, and
so everything's cheap and fast.
There was like a big castle that came with 30 figures for like, you know, $15 or something like that.
Wow.
Anyway, we're getting off track a little bit.
Well, this was my redeemable point about teaching kids about having to wait for things.
Yeah, but now we've started talking about Christmas. This is getting out of hand.
I'm sorry.
We skipped over Thanksgiving as always.
Okay, so another redeemable component that I have is dressing up. Okay.
Oh,
Is this a good time to talk about the costumes we're all wearing right now?
So here's what I have on dressing up. I say, when choosing who to dress up as, encourage your children to dress up as admirable characters. Talk to them about the character's positive characteristics. What do you like about this character, or how can you be like this person? Help your children see the good things that draws them to that character, and how God can help us be that way too. So God's the one who makes us strong, or the most important beauty is on the inside. Stuff like that.
That's good.
I really like that one, actually. I always wondered when you see kids that are skeletons or whatever, you know, it's like, what's the backstory there?
I was listening to a YouTube video of somebody talking about Halloween. He didn't grow up in a Christian home, and so he was like an axe murderer or something one Halloween. And so he was like talking about just how like perverted that is, but just as a kid, it's just something about like that, like being able to scare people and have power. It was like what motivated him to like, you know, want to be that.
Yeah, like if you're the scary, kind of the Batman approach, like if you're the scary thing, then things won't scare you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I've never thought about that.
I do have 2 caveats to that principle, though.
Okay.
Well, maybe just one, but one is some kids just are lazy or whatever, don't get any help, and so they just end up being a wizard, and they might not have a reason for admiring a wizard because they just wore a bathrobe.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, my other caveat is I definitely would love to see more kids dress up as a ghost with a sheet with 2 holes cut. Just for the tradition of it.
Yeah, those don't necessarily fit into my suggestion here.
I don't think I've ever seen that in real life, but I would definitely like to. I'm sure most people don't want to cut a sheet.
I guess you could still use it.
That's true, I suppose.
I mean, 2 little holes in your sheet isn't going to like wreck it. Anyway, okay. The third one I have is jack-o'-lanterns.
Oh, we didn't even talk about that. I have a lot of memories related to pumpkin carving.
Yeah, that's probably one of our biggest Halloween memories, actually, more than the costumes.
Mm-hmm.
That's true, because Dad would do really intricate pumpkins, which we thought was.
And Mom would cook the seeds, which I liked.
Yes.
Well, and we would help him scoop it out and clean it out, and then it was so exciting to finally see it lit too at the end of the night when you get to see the candle in it.
Yeah, I've taken that on and done some like really intricate ones over the past few years. I didn't do one last year, but I really enjoyed doing that too.
Because you guys went commercial and just went to the Halloween neighborhood.
Malachi's not quite old enough to really appreciate that sort of thing, I don't think. or last year he wasn't. He probably could this year, but it also takes quite a bit of time.
It does, yeah.
So what I have on jack-o'-lanterns is I've seen pumpkin carvings used as an illustration of God's work in our lives. When we're in his hands, he cleans out all the junk inside of us, makes us beautiful, and places his light within us so that we can shine for him.
That's cool. Wouldn't have thought of that.
So I think that's something you could use it as that illustration for your kids. Like, this is why we're doing this. This is what it represents.
Yeah, and also when people come to the front door and they see something positive and redemptive, that can also be good. Would Mom do one that was a cross, or I don't know? It seems like often there would be a cross somehow implemented into ours.
I think we always put the cross on the back of them.
Which was kind of twofold. I think we liked the idea of it being like there's always the true meaning present, but also I think we liked having more light get out of it. So it wasn't just dark on the back of it, but there was the candle could shine.
Well, it has to get air. The candle has to get oxygen.
That's the practical reason.
Oh, yeah, because the kind you would do wouldn't be open on the front. Okay, right. Yeah, I never did those kind where it's like you just sort of carve it out, but the fleshy bit is still there.
Yeah, if you're doing like really intricate stuff, you have to do it that way.
Riley and I, a couple years back, we did... I did one that said peace, and she did one that said joy.
You got Advent pumpkins.
Yeah. Oh gosh, we're skipping to Christmas again.
That'd be funny. You have like 3 orange ones, and one is like the white pumpkin. Is the peace is the different color, right? Or is it
joy?
Hope. No, hope is the different.
Okay. I don't know.
We lit a new one each week leading up to Halloween.
Then the next one is just pray with your children, which isn't really like a quality of Halloween that you're redeeming, but it's just like something redemptive to do on Halloween. Is that I just said, be sure to pray with your kids before any sort of Halloween activity, that God would be with them and use them and protect them.
That one takes me back to the Haunted Mansion at Disney World, because when we were little, especially as a family, we would always pray together before writing that.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of that.
Wait, shouldn't you say why?
Why we would pray together?
You said we would pray together before writing that. I think you said, like just so that...
Well, because it's a very dangerous ride. We were worried about derailment, pranking spirits, causing trouble.
Falling on that moving sidewalk.
Yeah.
Well, it's just a recognition that when you're dealing with ghosts or spirits, that those things aren't just like pretend, that there's like there's real ghosts and spirits. And even though we felt like the Haunted Mansion at Disney is made just for fun and is mostly like silly,
kind of a joke.
Yeah, mostly kind of a joke. It's dealing with real elements that you don't want to just play around with. So you want to be sure that like spiritually you're not having some sort of open door for spiritual interaction or spiritual effect.
I think that like open door concept is something that we got so much growing up from both the parents, really. And only later did I realize that so many people just don't get that concept,
It's really important. I'm preaching on Halloween, actually, Sunday morning, and going to be talking about spiritual warfare and deliverance a little bit. And yeah, it's shocking how people can be so blind to that kind of stuff. We have students that are like dealing with depression or self-harm or stuff, and then they wear shirts that are like skulls, and they will wear like earrings that are like guns or stuff like that. And I'm like,
I think the gun thing is even more disturbing than the skull thing.
But either way, it's like, obviously this is not a good thing to do when this is, especially if that's an open door in your life where that you're dealing with those sorts of thoughts. But a lot of people just have no clue. So praying with your children is super important. I mean, even if what you're doing on Halloween is completely innocent, you want to be sure that you're not being exposed, you're letting your kids be exposed to anything that you shouldn't. Especially as a parent, that's your role as like a spiritual guardian, I think. Yeah,
and also establishes the reality, like you were talking about it. There is a real spiritual dimension, and there is a war going on. And so even if something is more light and a silly version, like how we feel about the Haunted Mansion at Disney, recognizing and teaching that there is real spiritual warfare at the same time is important.
Yeah. So then the last point is that death has been defeated. So remind your kids that God has conquered death and the evil one. He is victorious over the forces of darkness, so we don't have to be afraid. So taking advantage of that focus that Halloween has on death and evil to like continue to remind us that God has overcome those things. The last main section is what needs to be avoided. And we've talked a little bit about that, but what comes to mind for you there? Like things that we shouldn't try to redeem or participate in as Christians?
My initial thoughts are very subjective. It would take me a little longer to articulate why, but it just comes to mind like stuff that I actually think is scary, like tombstones and zombies and witches. And when I drive past a house this time of year and see like a cemetery and zombie decaying thing, I just always wonder why people are putting that stuff in their yard. But again, it's kind of subjective. I'd have to think more exactly why those things are detestable to me.
Yeah, my initial reaction just now was to be like, what's scary about a tombstone? Tombstones aren't scary. But then when you talk about people like putting it in their yard, it is kind of like, it's not scary, but it's like, like why would you? I don't know. It's just weird. Like, look, we have dead people, you know?
Right. So yeah, I think, I don't know that it actually made it in my final cut of this pamphlet, but one of them had something to do specifically about that and not glorifying death.
Yeah, something about using it as a decoration is a little odd.
Yeah, we like the last point on what to redeem is that God's overcome death, so we don't have to be afraid of it.
Yes.
So then we don't want to be celebrating death or glorifying death because that's the enemy that God's overcome.
I would say also kind of touching on the real subcultures having to do with Wiccanism and, you know, what all else. Well, and even if it weren't for that, but just in general, anything that draws upon that kind of fortune-telling, seance, witchcraft type stuff. I think, you know, at parties and whatnot, I could understand how there'd be either decorations or like events or whatever, like that kind of thing.
Right.
That's very directly not to be toyed with.
So yeah, you guys basically have hit kind of on the first 2 points that I have. So the first one is just the demonic is real. Instead, acting like there's no danger in Halloween is foolish. Avoid the dark, demonic, scary, or violent components. Okay, dark, demonic, scary, or violent components. Use the opportunity to explain to your kids that we don't participate in those sorts of things. You can say things like, we don't like scary stuff, God doesn't want us to be afraid. Or, ew, we don't want to dress up as something gross, Jesus likes nice, joyful things.
Yeah, that reminds me again of the podcast we did with Christian about how beauty is an attribute of God and about how the ugly and violent and perverse is not.
Yeah, and so we've already been doing that with Malachi where we pass a store that's got Halloween stuff and we'll use that like, we don't want to look over there, like that's gross. That stuff's scary. We don't like scary stuff because Jesus doesn't like scary stuff, or Jesus likes pretty things and not gross things. So, I mean, obviously, what I said earlier, like communicate to your kids in a way that's age appropriate. Like Malachi just turned 3. So, like, that's the age appropriate way to talk about those things with a 3-year-old.
Yeah. And there he is. And I just heard him in the background. That also goes into another thing I'm very against, and that's like haunted houses and scary corn maze or whatever.
I did that. I went to a haunted corn maze once.
What do you think about it?
Well, I got delivered later, obviously, but I haven't had many opportunities to do mazes, so I was pretty interested in it. But the haunted aspect was mostly fairly predictable type stuff. Like we're walking through the maze and suddenly we come to a clearing and there's a coffin. Like, oh, okay. I wonder if someone's going to be inside that. And then it was. This was not like a terribly, high budget or scary one. Anyway, but I can definitely see like that's on the line because normally I would not really be about like doing haunted type stuff. But I was like, oh, corn maze. Cool.
To me, it's similar with how I feel about horror movies. I'm also very against horror movies. And I think it goes back to the things you're expressing there, Joel, about fear, violence, and ugliness is not attributes of God and therefore should not be things we delight in.
Right.
Whereas in my mind, that's very different from something like the Haunted Mansion ride at Disney, which is, there's a playfulness, maybe. I don't feel like it's meant to scare or gross out or glorify violence in the same way that a horror movie or the stereotypical haunted house does.
Even if, and I think this gets back to kind of the different people's levels of discernment or their standards or, subjectivity. In that case, I feel like the overall spirit is one of comedy more, like joking. But I do think there's aspects of it's like, I wouldn't have put that in. That's kind of,
right
over the line.
So where do you draw the line and say like, okay, this is too far now? And that's why, obviously, there's going to be some differing opinions of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And now on those different points you got made, you've hit several of these things I have about what needs to be avoided. So the second one is witchcraft, which Daniel mentioned earlier. So I just said anything having to do with the occult must be avoided. Protect your home from that stuff. And said this is one of the main holidays for Wicca and other pagan religions. So exactly what you were saying, Daniel, is that I really feel like that's an area that you can't play with at all if it's a witchcraft occult type of thing.
Yep.
Then the next one I have is horror movies. I said horror movies are dangerous. Those images will be with your kids forever. Most horror movies celebrate the demonic, wickedness, the occult, or death and violence. Don't let your kids watch something that's frightening for them.
Mm-hmm.
So again, just what you were saying, Paul, is like the delight. I think that's a really good way to put it. Like we don't want to delight in these things that are wicked or occult or violent.
Maybe one thing helpful when thinking about these is that idea of what's redeemable. It's a very hard argument to say there's anything redeemable about watching a horror movie. I've never really heard a good argument about why that would be beneficial for a Christian to do.
And I think that probably gets into some more levels of subjectivity that any of us would know about. What all counts as a horror movie? What are the subgenres? Like,
That's
I
true.
remember me and Clay were real excited to watch Alligator 2, about this giant alligator in the sewers, because we like that kind of stuff. But some people might say that's horror, because it's a giant monster, but the spirit of what you're saying, I think people can relate. You don't have to necessarily define exactly every single point to understand the spirit of what Paul's saying here.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing that I've struggled with a little bit in this whole concept of what can we redeem from Halloween is the spooky element. A lot of people enjoy some of the spooky element of Halloween. And so I've thought a lot about, is there anything in that is redeemable, or is it just like fear-based? And I haven't really come down on it, because there seems to be some level of innocence to some of the spooky stuff, but then it's like, I don't know how to actually pull out the redemptive quality.
I think spooky in itself is such a quaint, archaic word, like it just, spooky is like the kid version of scary, I guess. So it just sounds like it's not really that bad.
Right. And that's my goal. So like this stuff, like you're saying about like the kids in sheets, right?
Yeah.
For being a little ghost or whatever, like that's not scary. That's just kind of like you're being that spooky thing.
Right.
And so, but I don't know I don't have a good argument for like why that could be okay as a Christian. So
I don't think that I could either, but a proposal I could make is maybe there's a cuteness to spooky, like something that kind of like a small dog that's trying to be like big and tough and scare off, and I think there's some of that, the little ghost that, a ghost should be a scary thing that terrorizes people. But then when you have this very like rounded edges, big, sad looking eyes, it's more just like a pitiful creature. There could be some element of like thing trying to be scary that isn't.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how much, I don't know if there's necessarily a redemptive element of that, but I could see that that's where it crosses into this more of a cute line. But maybe that's still not healthy to be like trying to be, I don't know.
Yeah. And then also along those lines, the suspense movies, or like that feeling of like being startled, that I feel like is not wrong.
And there is an aspect of that too with the haunted thing, is like, I know something's going to jump out, but I don't know when it's going to happen.
Right. Yeah. So I don't necessarily think that's not the same level, obviously, as these like demonic, violent things. But again, it's a little bit hard to articulate. Like, why do I feel like it's okay to enjoy suspense movies and enjoy being startled, but not like really trying to scare somebody? Anyway, my very first point in this was that Halloween is complicated. And here's some reasons why as we get into some of these like areas that I haven't really been able to hash out as well. But anyway, moving on from things, we mentioned horror movies as something that are dangerous. And then you guys mentioned haunted houses. That's one I have as well. Haunted houses are probably not a good idea. The goal is to induce fear.
Yeah.
That's what I put there. And again, I said are probably not a good idea because I assume there could be like more innocent versions of haunted houses.
I mean, we've already talked about it.
Right.
With the Disney thing.
Yeah, Disney.
How about judgment houses?
Yeah, or like Judgment House or whatever.
The goal of those is to induce fear as well.
That's true. The more healthy kind of fear, right?
Yeah, well, yes, a more healthy, justifiable fear.
For people that don't know, there are these things in the South that are like Christian haunted houses that focus on making people afraid of hell. So at the end, they'll decide to be saved.
Get them saved.
At the end, yeah, there's kind of like they try to really scare you, and then at the end, they're like, but here's heaven, look how nice, look how happy, just relax. And they really are a Christian version of haunted houses because they only do it around the Halloween season.
Yeah, there's a little strange.
I didn't know that was a regional thing. I thought that was just more of a like Baptist thing.
We're
pretty sure it's a Bible Belt thing.
We're definitely not taking my youth group to one. I'll just put it that way.
Obviously, we're all of a similar mind on this, and maybe there's other people who could explain more the fun of trying to be scared that I don't think we really relate to. So for me, if it's actually scary, then that doesn't sound very fun. It sounds more just unpleasant. And if it's not actually scary, then it better be entertaining somehow, like funny, or otherwise it's just going to be boring. So unless there's some kind of spin on it, I would think your only choices are it's going to be fear or boredom.
I think for some people, there's like that thrill, a controlled fear.
Like a roller coaster.
Yeah, kind of like a roller coaster, like a false sense of danger.
I guess so.
I don't know exactly how to articulate that, but there's like an interest. And that's one of the things about suspense also is there's this like, wow, my body gets like acting as if something dangerous is happening, but it's really not. And I know that, so it's okay.
You just have to be really careful because of a lot of the other things we've talked about.
That's right.
Yeah.
The last 2 points is protect your kids' modesty. Sexualized costumes are not healthy even for adults. It's really weird to me that there's that component of Halloween that like, oh, you dress scantily in these like costumes and it's okay because it's like Halloween. That's very strange.
I guess it just comes from, in general, when you're dressing up as all manner of things, there's going to be some people who kind of dress as a thing that intrinsically has that aspect, and then over time it gets blurred. I don't know. It is kind of weird.
I think it just comes from the whole move toward like debauchery a little bit.
Yeah.
You have like parties, and so that becomes drinking and immodesty and stuff kind of goes into a lot of those worldly parties. And then the last one I have is just fear. Fear is something that we don't need to embrace. Said fear is not of the Lord, so we don't need to celebrate or glorify fear.
Good.
So
I agree with that.
All right. And so that's the end of the what needs to be avoided. Then
fear of hell or fear of God.
Fear of the Lord, yeah.
Yeah, that's healthy. And like fear of like a poisonous snake, that's a little different.
That just goes back, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but then, the fear of the Lord is over and over praised. So
yeah, I had for 2 Timothy 1:7 listed on that point. And that's one of the main, I think, dangers of Halloween for kids is that it becomes something that instills fear.
It's really hard to relate or like remember this as an adult, but for kids, there's certain things like that can become like like you said, it stays with them, and it can be like a source of trauma, a source of a debilitating developmental experience. And you can't always predict what that's going to be for a little kid. Sometimes we can't tell what scares them about something.
That's tough, and you can't protect him from all that kind of stuff. Even like showing Disney movies to Malachi and fast forwarding through the bad guy parts. Even sometimes like I'm fast forwarding and there's a still shot that'll show up. And then like I've heard
of a scary wolf or something.
Well, just like Ursula, for example.
Oh, yeah.
So like basically going through Little Mermaid and just showing him like the songs and the not scary parts, but then like there's a still shot of Ursula, and later on he makes a comment about like the bad guy and like from the movie, and is like interested in that, and I can tell there's like fear, and I'm like, well, golly, like you can't just protect from all those kind of things. But to your point, I think we need to be really careful as adults recognizing those types of things that can be scary to children. So then on the back, I just have like a kind of general statement. It says, we encourage each family to develop their own approach to Halloween based on their own convictions with input from their Christian community. The responsibility to make this decision rests on the adults in the family, not the children. Always be willing to be in complete obedience to God, no matter what he may ask you to give up or stop doing.
Or what he wants you to start doing.
Right.
Maybe, that goes back to the using it as an outreach thing. And maybe you've been an anti-Halloween person and you need to start the thinking about ways to use it in a healthy way to reach somebody.
Yeah, that's good. I do think it's important for us to all like recognize like, all right, God, if you tell me to stop doing Halloween, I'm not doing it at all. Like no matter how fun I've thought it is or how fun I think it could be for the kids, I'm not going to hold on to that if you say not to do it. So that's the pamphlet, and then it has scripture from Ephesians chapter 5, verse 7 through 15. So I'll read that real quick. It says, therefore, do not be partners with them For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. So live as children of the light. For the fruit of the light consists of all goodness, righteousness, and truth. And find out what pleases the Lord. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. It is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret. But everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light. That's why it is said, "Wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you." Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is.
And the thing about it is kids will tell you that they're in it for the neighbors, that they're in it for the community, that they're in it for the self-expression of their costume. But really deep down, if you probe them, they're just in it for the candy, and that's a stronghold.
Ooh, that kind of stuff gets even worse for parents too, because parents are like, well, my kid doesn't need all that candy, so I'm just going to take some of it. I'm going to eat it. Which is true. Your kid doesn't need all that candy, but you shouldn't eat it either.
I've heard stories about that, but to my knowledge, our parents never took our candy or ever.
Oh, we definitely took some of Malachi's last year.
Oh, okay.
I mean, he's just turned 3. He had just turned 2 last year, and he's got this gigantic bag of candy. It's like, no, you need like 5 pieces, and that's it.
Yeah. That's true. I guess when they're really young, that's easier to pull off. Happy Halloween.
Yeah. Now let's try to scare our listeners.